I'm Valerie Cushman, Senior Director of Alumni Engagement and Inclusion Initiatives at William & Mary, and so glad we are all gathered here together today on a topic that's obviously always important, but maybe important more now than ever, given the financial situation that we have experienced in the last few weeks, and that will impact us for several years going forward, no doubts. I'm really excited to introduce Tracy Shackelford. Tracy is a relatively new member of the Society of 1918. Tracy, when did you join us? What month was it?
It was just a couple of months ago, Val.
A couple months ago, all right.
Yeah, start of the year.
Relatively new member. I came to know Tracy early on in my time at William & Mary when I was working with the William & Mary Women's Mentoring Program, which is a mentoring program that brings together current students with faculty and staff, and we stay connected for the year and work in a really symbiotic relationship, mentoring one another. And Tracy was invited in to come in and talk about probably some of the concepts she'll share today, but much more with our faculty and staff together around women's investing. And I really was caught by her remarks and what she shared and the passion she shares and the knowledge she shares about some of the differences we might experience when we think about this area compared to our male peers. So I am not the expert, but Tracy is. So I am very quickly going to turn it over to Tracy. We'll have some interactive components of today, which is a nice addition to what we've been doing in the past. So we'll look forward to what Tracy has to share with us. Tracy, welcome.
Hi, thanks, Val. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. So unfortunately, we can't really see each other again. But thank you so much. I'm really, really excited to be here and passionate about women and finance. So I think a lot of people, women and men, equate financial planning with spreadsheets and Wall Street. And with those in mind, no wonder, a lot of women dread and even avoid financial planning or just the topic of finance and investing. And back in the day, a lot of people talked about rate of return as being the sign of a successful financial plan. And what I'm going to hopefully, leave you here with today is, number one, having a good time, learning a little bit and interacting with each other, and also understanding that financial planning is not just about spreadsheets and Wall Street. So what if it's more about our money story? The script we learned when we were growing up, whether or not we followed that script on what money might mean to us, thinking about our own habits around money. Are you proud of the way you treat money or not? How do you want your children, or if you don't have children or grandchildren, younger relatives, to describe what they see when they're thinking about, you or me with our money? Basically, I think of financial planning as what we want out of life, whether we're 25 and the new graduates that we have on the line, or we're 85. And what are the logical steps we need to take to tie what's in our heart, things that are most important to us, to our balance sheet? In my world, I often hear women say, I don't understand the investments or the finances. And, if something happened to my spouse, I'd be absolutely lost because I don't know where anything is and what we're doing and why. And it's not all women at all, but I do hear these comments more often than I would like. And I know it's natural in a household to divide and conquer responsibilities, certainly makes things easier. What I, would like to, share with you today, and also what I, implore women to do is, if we're not already engaged in the family finances or the investment strategies, pull up a seat to the financial planning table and be an active participant and really get involved. So in the next 25 or 30 minutes, or our time together, what I'd like to do is shed some more perspective on why financial planning is different for women and why we need to be part of the discussion. And like Val said, we've got a breakout room question and we've got a poll. So hopefully it'll be fun and engaging. I loved this when I found it. I'll give you a second to read, from Sue Gertelman, William & Mary alum. what she's doing, Sue, in thinking about, I mean, she's really thinking philanthropy and legacy. What she's doing is asking us to think about what we want our story to be from here on. And what I'm going to do before we think about that is I'm going to take us back, because I think every good story has a beginning and it's got chapters in between and it has an ending. And before we can think about where we want to go, I want you and all of us to think about where our money story began. So Val is going to actually break us into groups of 4 or 5, and we're going to give 15 minutes roughly of time for us to share the most impactful story around money from our childhood. So it's either our most vivid memory, something we observed or participated in or were taught, but the one that really is in your mind when you think about your childhood. And we're going to ask that each group have one person to just take some notes and jot down some, I don't know, common themes or things that stand out. And then we'll report back briefly when we get back together before we move on to think about the rest of the financial planning. So, Val, if you don't mind sending us into meeting rooms. This is fascinating for me, and hopefully you all enjoyed hearing from each other and learning stories as well. Actually, one thing I remembered that is a great lesson. One of the women in our group is actually matching the savings of, I can't remember, I think it was her grandson. And she said he's really annoying because he keeps coming up to her saying, hey, I've got $2, you know, you're gonna match this, but in a good way. So that's a great sort of almost like tactic to set aside too for kids, grandkids, nieces and nephews to help them get on the savings bandwagon. So back to Sue Gertelman's quote. What do, you know, if you think about from this point forward, what do you want your story to be? I think if we can visualize our story, what we want from the next chapters of life, then we will engage in the financial behaviors that will actually lead us to reach that vision. So as we're talking about financial planning and we get a little more granular and talk about some of the challenges that women face, you know, that we women face versus men, I'd love to have you be thinking about, you know, what is my story from this point forward, no matter where we are. So our next stat takes us into the next slide, a stat that I think is pretty powerful. So this year, we women are supposed to be holding and should hold 2/3 of the US wealth, which is pretty impressive. We are earning it, we're investing it, we're inheriting it. If you look at the Society of 1918, $4.2 million pledged and over $2 million collected so far. And 14% of the members have lifetime giving of more than $1 million. I think women holding more wealth means that we can take charge of our own planning and our legacy decisions, which is really, really exciting. And certainly not what some of the groups talked about with, you know, women who, you know, weren't able to do things, couldn't own a credit card or couldn't have a bank account, really in our lifetime. So when it comes to financial planning, we women have 3 distinct challenges. And I know we've got a wide range here, from young women who have literally will just be graduating from the college to women who've been retired for some years. So some of these may be less or more applicable to you. Hopefully we can make them applicable to everybody. But challenge number 1, we earn less than men. Number 2, we are the majority of caretakers. And then number 3, we do live longer. So I think they're just a reminder of why we need to be part of the planning discussions, you know, pulling up that chair and being active. So we'll delve into each of them, and then some tips for you know, what we can do as well. 83 cents on the dollar is what women earn now. I remember in my working years, it being as low as 75 cents. So we're certainly making progress. Some of us might be thinking, oh my gosh, 83 cents on the dollar, that really stinks. And it's something to be concerned about. What you may not have thought about is the long-term implications as it relates to retirement. So we're going to take a fictional duo, Norm and Norma. They both started so keep in mind, Norm earns $1 and Norma earns 83 cents on that. They're both saving the same percentage of their income. They both have a 50% match from their company, right? They both are getting raises at the same rates. The money is compounding for 35 years. And at the end of that time frame, Norm has $300,000 more doing the same type of savings that Norma does. So when I think about that, it's easy to go, oh my gosh, that's really depressing. I think about the fact that all it does for me is underscore the necessity for women and young women. This is a lesson for you all to start saving early and to be disciplined and diligent about it. And I find from my, the work that I do, that women are more likely to save at a young age and be concerned about their future. Whereas a lot of times some of the guys have more of a cavalier attitude. They don't really think about it until they start getting really serious and maybe thinking about settling down or something like that. I did an informal Facebook poll probably 3 weeks ago now. And the question I asked was, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self? And I posted later a top 10. And again, this is just what my friends and other folks reported back. But the first two pieces of advice, number one, pay yourself first. We know that people who save first and spend the difference have a much better outcome than those who spend first and save what's left over at the end of the month. And then the second, number two, was save consistently and a certain percentage of the income. And so I think that's the lesson is, I don't think we ever think about this number and what earning less means for the long run. And that's a valuable lesson. And just, I think for those who have daughters or women that you mentor, Val mentioned the mentor program that William and Mary has, this is a really important lesson for them to learn. Challenge number two, we are the majority of caregivers. Val, do you have a poll for us?
Sure. Would you like me to launch the poll now?
I think so.
All right, here comes a quick poll, everyone. You all are quick. A couple more to pop in. All right, here comes the results. Tracy et al.
All right. 71% yes. So let's see how we measure up with this very informal poll with this group. Over 75% of caregivers are women. We know that caregiving can take many forms, right? It can take the form of stepping away from working part-time or full-time to take care of children or a younger relative, and it can also take the form of caring for an older relative. And caregiving, particularly if we're talking about our, stepping away for somebody younger, but also somebody older, it does impact us financially. And it impacts us in a couple of ways because we're no longer earning an income or earning the same income. And then we're also potentially spending more. And what I find is that, couples or individuals who plan for that and really think about how the budget might be changing, how the earnings going to change, how the spending is likely to be changed, they're able to approach this caregiving as more something I get to do and I have the privilege to do, rather than it's something that I have to do that is impacting my finances negatively. And I think that's the key, is to feel like this is something we get to do because we want to, and to feel good about it if we can take the financial strain out of the equation. So what we are going to do is just take a quick look at another stat, and the next slide I'm going to show is, I mean, admittedly, it was shocking to me when I first saw it and really thought about it. And it's not sending a message as in what we should or should not do, but basically, if we, if somebody who's 30 years old decides to take 2 years out of workforce at the beginning of their career, earlier on in their career, and potentially doesn't make adjustments, then you're looking at almost $500,000 in potential difference in terms of retirement and just overall financial changes. Now, that being said, when I was probably 23 years old, I worked for a large law firm in Atlanta, and one of the partners whose son I knew from college took me aside and gave me some incredible advice. And that was that, his name was Lou, and he said, when Barbara and I got married, Tracy, we knew that, if we were able to have children, that we wanted Barbara to stay home. And so from day one of us being married, we actually saved her income. We didn't get used to living on it. And he said that way, when the children came along and she stepped out of the workforce, we at least didn't have to worry about her income. We had certainly had more costs, but we didn't have to worry about the loss of her income. And then the next piece of advice was also surprising and shocking to me, because he said, I want you to look around this firm. And it was one of the top 10 at the time in Atlanta. He said, 1/3 of the partners of this law firm are one paycheck away from losing it all. And that was both of those lessons were really valuable to me. And just, I think sometimes we just sort of fall into these things that we're going to do without thinking about the financial impact. And so taking care of the financial impact and really thinking through them and budgeting and saving. And now with the COVID, a lot of people are spending less, which is really interesting. I think a lot of other people are somebody mentioned it in your report back out, really feeling the impact of potentially not having built up an emergency fund or some other financial decisions. But anyway, caregiving can be incredible. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat, so I
sure.
might shut up. And we've got about 13 minutes total left, just to help you in terms of pacing.
Okay, great. Yeah.
And someone has posed the question: is there a different impact if you were to stop out later in your career, but have, and re-entry maybe potentially being a problem, and stopping out when you're making more? Or is there a bigger impact stopping out early and then losing the cumulative years of interest?
Right. And I think the spreadsheet folks in the audience would love to run some numbers on this. In my world, the way I look at it is really, it's about saving. Because somebody who steps out later in their career, let's say in their mid-30s or 40s, whatever it might be, if they've been a great saver and a diligent saver for years, it does provide potentially more options and more choices. That doesn't mean that either one is right or wrong. I think it's just making the decision with eyes wide open and realizing that we oftentimes need to make accommodations. Thanks for asking that. The typical caregiver is a woman, married, she has a job, and she's taking about 20 hours a week providing care for a loved one. What we did not do with the poll was ask what's the sort of age breakout of our group, but we were 71% have or are providing care for a loved one. It's one of the really most important things here is this most likely, I would imagine, is somebody caring for elderly relatives, parents. The important thing is having the conversation with our parents, those uncomfortable conversations that are asking them, how have they prepared if we're going to be providing care or thinking about it? What is their financial situation? And is it possibly going to come back and impact us one way or the other? I think that's really, really critical, is that having that planning conversation around that. And then we're going to run into the third, is that we live longer. And I think that's great news. A woman who's 65 today has a 50% chance of living to age 90. We talk about, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, the retirement kind of having 3 chapters of our story. There's the go-go years, which is the first part, which is where we stop working and it's almost like a 24/7 vacation, we're active, we're traveling, we're going on this wonderful William and Mary trips, we're eating out, visiting with our friends a lot. Then we have, and they tend to be higher cost years. Then we have the slow go, and those are the years where we're just not doing as much actively. And then the no-go years, and those are sort of chapter 3 of retirement, where we do see the costs increase. And I think the message here is realizing nobody has a crystal ball. We don't know how long we're going to live, but we tend to outlive our husbands if we're married to a man, and we also need to plan for that longevity. And then there is the topic about needing long-term care. So if we live to age 65, there's 70% chance we're going to need some sort of long-term care. And long-term care is really described as those things that we normally can do. I can get out of my chair and walk, I can cook, I can feed myself and take a shower. Those types of activities of daily living, they're called, that we may not be able to do alone anymore. And that's what long-term care is. And there are some people who are wealthy enough to self-fund in long-term care because the options around or that are available for Medicare, Medicaid, and or health insurance plans do not cover this type of care in almost all instances. And again, Ernst & Young did a study about a decade ago, and they said you need to have about $5 or $6 million in liquid net worth to be able to self-fund. And then otherwise, there are options like insurance or other things to think about. But it's a really important question to be thinking about ourselves if we're a certain age, and to be asking our parents about before we need care. So the questions that we would have with our parents are, where do they want to age? I have a whole list of them. What are their expectations of us? The elder daughter tends to be the provider of most care. What are they expecting of their kids? Do they have the financial resources set aside? Who is their power of attorney? Things like that are really important. And again, if we're sort of at the age of 50 and above, we should be asking the same questions of ourselves. So I just have, when we're talking about finishing up, a couple of key actions. And again, not making any assumptions about all of members of the society or who's here today. But if you are married and you find that your husband's been doing most of the planning, I think it's a risky proposition to sort of delegate that responsibility. So pull up a chair, get involved, and realize that the conversations should and can be fun as well if we start thinking about our story. The second is that if we outlive our spouse or unfortunately get a divorce, the financial planning is going to come to us. And I think it's, and I don't know if easy is the right word, but let's just use the word easier transition if we have been involved ourselves. And then we're not hit with, the grief of losing a husband or a spouse and seeing the finances for the first time. So develop that relationship, get involved, understand the details, and also understand that it's a combination of the, of the numbers and then the stories and where we want our next chapter to go. And then the second thing is, if you haven't put together an estate plan with an estate planning attorney and given thought about this or done it recently, that goes hand in hand, I think, with financial planning. It's really thinking about what type of financial legacy do we want to leave, and also making sure that there isn't any friction left among family after we are gone. And we could probably spend a lot of time talking stories about, families where we've heard where things have not gone well after a parent passed away. So update the financial plan as well. Quick story on my side. My stepfather died completely suddenly last July, and he and my mom had put together their financial plans, but they hadn't updated them in 8 years. And I know his wishes had changed, but the trust that was set up back then is a trust that rules. And it's very unfortunate in some instances. Another thing around the estate planning, attorneys will give us the estate documents. It's all in legalese. It's sometimes hard to really understand. I always suggest putting a note, a letter to the people that you're leaving behind, talking about your values and what's important to you and what you hope they have learned, and really turning it into a story about your life, because the legal documents are going to distribute all of the assets. This is our last opportunity to share a story. So speaking of stories, my goal was to help, maybe share some information that when we take the time to create a financial plan, and one that's powerful and connects our personal story and where we want our story to go with the financial actions that we're taking, that we can put the worries to rest and spend our life living. And we can do that now, and we can also think about the future. We started off sharing stories. We all have chapters left in our book, and one day we're going to have an ending as well. What I would love to challenge all of you all to do is to take time and reflect some more on your past and the stories that you heard and what you saw. Reflect on the story that you want to build from this point forward in your life, and continue to think about it, and think about how the money connects to the personal story and the story of your philanthropy and your family and your values that you want to leave behind. And I think, Val, I will end on that, so that if there are any other comments or discussions or questions, that we can chat a little bit longer.
Sure. And if anyone else has questions, you can drop them in the chat or just shout them out. There is one question in the chat about whether or not long-term care insurance is a worthwhile investment.
Well, I wouldn't call it an investment, first of all, but I understand what you're saying. And I think it really depends on the situation. I'm not hedging, because I would hate to say yes or no. Some people have very strong thoughts and feelings around why they have long-term care or why they don't. And it really depends on each person's individual situation, to be honest, and what you want to have happen. When I think about long-term care planning and long-term care insurance, or self-funding, whichever the vehicle is, it's less about me. And for my husband and me, it's about protecting our children from the dual combination of having to make decisions about our care and paying for the care. I would much rather them direct the care than have to finance it. But that was our personal situation based on our financial analysis that we did. But it's worth certainly researching and making an educated decision, probably, rather than an emotional one.
Well, Tracy, that leads in nicely to the next question, which is, can you give tips on how to find a good financial advisor?
This could be a very self-serving answer, but I will, I'll tell you what I like. I want, and the stat is unbelievable, because 70 to 90% of all women leave their husband's advisors after divorce or death. And the reasons are, you hear nightmare stories because the wife was never involved in the conversations. Either physically there, or she was there and the advisor always just communicated with the husband. So look for somebody that you connect with. Look for somebody who's a great listener. Obviously, that is, reputable. I mean, referrals are certainly I think, one of the better ways to find any type of professional. So somebody who's been doing it for a while, who either has a CFP, certified financial planner, so they are operating as a fiduciary, and a fiduciary basically just means they basically sign an oath and said that they're acting in the best interest of the client as opposed to themselves. Because frankly, there's a lot of, you have a lot of good and bad stories in my industry, unfortunately. I hope that helps.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, it is 4:59, so I have a couple of quick announcements, and certainly, and take a peek at your chat as well. Audra's just posted something as well, so take a peek at that chat. So first and foremost, Tracy, we thank you so much for putting the materials together, to thinking about it from the lens specifically of the Society of 1918 members, and for our couple of practices that we had to make sure that everything went smooth technologically. Tracy not only gave us today, but all the prep time to prepare for today. So everyone, let's please thank Tracy for that. Yes, thank you, Tracy.
Thank you. Thank you.